What's up guys, and today's a big day as you can see because we're able to finally showcase Nicole, a character who I've been highly anticipating since Not Quite was originally teased. And as for her gameplay, I can say she is definitively the new core support of Hexerei teams, and also I think she's potentially a core support of many of these multi-damage dealer attack scaling teams, at least for the foreseeable future. So how did she do that? Well, she's basically Bennett with team-wide attack buffs and with a shield instead of healing. The only stats she really cares about is attack and energy recharge, so it's not really that hard to get close to the 4k attack on her, which will cap out her buffs. Now I want to do a bit of theory crafting before we jump in, and we want to know how useful is a team-wide attack buffer. It's worth noting Bennett wasn't always a single target attack buffer. I'm sure you guys remember the snapshotting mechanic. This was mostly old self DPSs which could keep Bennett's buff despite switching off. Like my Xiangling has 1.8k attack right now. Nah, she has 2.5. Her burst is doing 8k or about 7k, and if I switch off her, she's still doing 8k. That's the way snapshotting works, mostly with older characters. These older characters like Xiangling, Fischl, Beidou, Ganyu, they could keep Bennett's buff even after switching off. However, most modern characters don't have this snapshotting mechanic. For example, Durin, Emily, and honestly, still even Fischl if you weren't able to use her skill inside Bennett's burst. And in many situations like this, even if they were commonly played with Bennett, they weren't getting that attack buff. But these teams were still modern. Imagine now playing Durin, and instead of always being at 1.9k attack, 2.5k there. And if he gets Nicole's full buff, 2.8k. So you're now going to see a big damage increase for a lot of these modern teams with Nicole's guaranteed team-wide attack buff. Now the second thing I wanted to think about is how useful is a shielder version of Bennett? And this is where it gets interesting because I was curious. So I looked at a lot of characters who you might consider playing with Bennett. And I was thinking, in an ideal scenario, would you want this character's sustain to be a healer or a shielder? And there might be small disagreements here or there, but what I found is almost every character actually prefers a shielder if you have a choice. Just not taking damage in the first place and getting that interrupt resistance is just literally superior than healing off that damage you took. And the reality is, unless your team literally needs a healer for a mechanic, like Farina's buff requirement, or even certain enemies like the Gecko needing you to shield, I think a shielder is basically always better. So with those two things, what did we learn? Well, I learned that the premise of Nicole is actually a landmark in Genshin, where as long as her damage increases are comparable to Bennett's, I think she could potentially be better than Bennett in every way. But can her damage increases be comparable to Bennett? With that said, let's actually learn what she does and what the numbers are. So the core of Nicole's kit is her skill, Revelation Uncreated Light. And the thing with her skill and her burst buffs is that there's two parts to each. Each has two multipliers which depend on the situation. Just remember that whilst I'm explaining it. So Nicole's skill activates her shield and her attack buff. It looks like this, and it has a great visual. The attack buff is based on Nicole's attack, 15% of Nicole's attack here. And yes, her attack buff is with her skill. That's all you need. And that's actually a great strength she has over many buffers, where her main utility is not burst reliant or energy reliant. And on top of that, she actually helps your team a lot since her skill generates an above average amount of pyro particles. Very nice. In comparison, Bennett is only getting you 2 or 3 pyro particles at a time. But what this can mean is inflexible weapons like TTDS, which requires her to be switched in at specific times. This can be not ideal since you often want to take advantage of her energy generation and use her to battery your team. And that's where you might want to be a bit more flexible. Honestly, it's very strong. Let's compare this shield with Zhongli's shield and Inef's shield. And it's cool to compare her with Zhongli because she's similar to him, where you don't really care about each other character's crit or damage really. You just build Zhongli for full HP and you let him tank. Let's say I've got 4,000 attack on Nicole. Her level 10 talent is 3.981. So almost 16k shield plus 3051. So at 19,000 shield, that can be doubling your character's HP bar. With Zhongli, let's say I have about 40,000 HP on Zhongli times 0.23. 9,000 shield plus 2712. So I've already got 12,000, but that's not the full story because Zhongli has extra talents that increase your shield strength. And you might also get Geo Res that further increases his shield strength. But as you can imagine, her even being similar to Zhongli in shield strength is very strong. And a good example of how tanky that is if you look at Inefa. Weirdly enough, if you actually look at Inefa's level 10 talents, it's basically the exact same. I don't know why they did that, but maybe they just copy and pasted it. But even though Inefa's multipliers are similar, you have to build her for damage. You're giving her a lot of crit. So I've got a bit over 2,000 attack. Let's be generous. Let's say I even have 2,300 attack. Her shield is very nice. But Nicole's is a lot better. And the cool thing, if we look at Nicole's shield, then you start to take damage. If I look at Zhongli instead, keep damaging me. He tanks through it. Now he starts to take damage. But if we look at Inefa, who is still a very good shielder, by the way. Let's look at her shield. Come on, damage me. Yeah, and her shield basically gets killed very quickly. But she's still a great shielder. So it just puts into perspective how strong Zhongli and Nicole's shields are. Now the next thing you're probably wondering is how strong is her shield's attack buff? So like I said, she has two sets of attack buffs, which is the first one in her skill talent, 15% of her attack, and it caps at 600. And then in her talent, she has another 300 attack. But the skill, 15% attack, this 600 means the cap is 4,000 attack. So if you're building triple attack main stats, maybe have a bit of attack on your feather and your flower. With her signature weapon, this is the starting attack I have in the menu. And yeah, notice how I said starting attack, because most attack buffs you get in your team will count to both her shield strength and her attack buffs. But let's say you don't have a signature weapon. I use Skyward Atlas. Slightly less than 4k attack, but if I activate Noblesse on Durin, now she's over 4k attack. Interestingly, Memory of Dust, the classic Ningguang weapon, is actually quite good on Nicole, but that's gonna have over 4k attack. If you have this really old event weapon, Oathsworn Eye, then you might not be at 4k attack. But if you use her skill, you're over 4k. Now I'm pretty sure this should count for her shield strength, but this shouldn't count for her attack buff. So my Zhongli has 2,052 attack. She should give 520 attack to Zhongli, which should be 2,572. So I use her skill. 2,572. So yeah, Zhongli did not get the buff of that. But if I switch to him to get the extra 300 attack for Nicole, wait to see the animation there, then that goes up by 300. But if we get other attack buffs, like Durin's from Noblesse, does Zhongli get a bigger attack buff? So I do that. Now Nicole's attack is slightly higher. If I use Nicole's skill, let's calculate what Zhongli got from Noblesse. 171 plus 2,572, 2,743, and he's actually got 2,771. 28 extra attack from Nicole times 0.2. So Nicole got 181 attack from Durin's Noblesse. If I times that 0.15, that's basically 28. So a portion of Nicole's attack buff doesn't benefit from her own skill. But if you stack stuff like Noblesse, maybe Tenacity, maybe also Pyro Resonance, there's a lot of attack buffs you can get in this team. And those will buff your Nicole's attack, which will buff her other stuff. So you probably really want to know, how does Nicole's attack buff compare with Bennett? I'm sure you guys probably know how Bennett's attack buff works already. His attack buff comes from his burst and it scales off of his base attack. So the stronger weapon you have, the more base attack he has. And then at level 13, this ratio is 119%. Plus, on top of that, with his C1, it's an extra 20, which most people have. So he actually gives 139% of his base attack. And even with a budget weapon like Sapwood Blade, he's giving over 1,000 attack. But if you have a high base attack 5-star weapon, a well-optimized Bennett can be giving over 1,200 attack. That is a lot of attack. The thing is, as we talked about before, you're only getting that attack buff either for the on-field character in his circle or off-field characters which can snapshot. If your off-field character can't snapshot, their attack drops a lot. So this attack buff gives either a ton or basically 0. What Nicole does instead is if you reach the cap, you get 600 attack plus 300 extra from her talent. However, this 300 extra attack can be conditional. If you're using a Hexerei character like Durin, Venti, Mona, Klee, Varka, it's not really conditional. They get this 300 extra attack straight away. However, non-Hexerei characters like Arlecchino or Clorinde or Kinich, you have to wait with them on field 3 seconds. So Nicole instantly gives Durin that extra attack. You see that from the animation. But I'll switch to Zhongli to wait 3 seconds. And then you see the extra attack from the animation. So Nicole's 900 to 600 attack buff versus Bennett's 1k to 1.2k attack buff. And honestly, it could sound like even if you factor in that Nicole can buff your whole team's attack, her attack buff is much less than Bennett's. Bear in mind, Bennett's C6 also gives your pyro characters 15% pyro bonus. So let me use Bennett's attack buff there. Look at that damage. Now let me use Nicole. So why is Klee still doing more damage with Nicole? You see that animation of Klee there? You're doing more damage with Nicole because Bennett's buffs is pretty much just his burst and maybe his C6. Nicole doesn't just have her skill and her extra attack from her talent. She also basically buffs with her burst as well. And her burst, which has a grey animation, this activates her coordinated attacks and it adds 4 extra hits onto your DPS alongside the shield and the attack buffs. No way, I didn't want to bolt, come on. No! And as you saw in the trailer, these coordinated attacks have a great visual. By default, it's a spectral version of Nicole attacking, but if using a Hexerei character, it actually shows them. I'm pretty sure the animation is usually that character's skill or even their charge attack. Like if I use Durin, it's his charge attack animation. But if I use Klee, it's her skill. So how much damage do these coordinated attacks do? Remember, her skill and her burst have 2 multipliers each. But at base, it does 180% of the character's attack. So if you're triggering it with Klee, it uses her stats. And where those 2 parts come from is at base, this is 180 times 4, which is not that much. But if you're using a Hexerei character, it's an extra 300 per attack. So 480 multiplied total per attack times 4. You can consider it basically like an extra source of damage for them. And a lot of characters don't have high multipliers, so you're going to see some big numbers. It's worth noting though, the base one uses your character's attack. The extra one here uses Nicole's attack. And this is great. It's great that this multiplier is higher because naturally Nicole is going to have a lot higher attack. But clearly it does mean Nicole does have several talents that give her an advantage to Hexerei teams, discouraging you from playing her in every team. In fact, even this 300% coordinate attack multiplier, you need to try and trigger this with your Hexerei teammate. In this team, triggering it with Klee or Durin's fine, but if I trigger it with Bennett, you're going to be getting only the weaker talent. The good thing is though, There's only 4 of them, so even if you do waste maybe one of these, you're not likely to waste more than one. So let's talk about Nicole's gear. And Nicole is a great user of this new artifact set, Celestial Gift, which is an incredible buff to Hexerei teams. First of all, it gives energy recharge for its 2-piece, but if you put this on a Hexerei character like Nicole or Durin or Fischl or Mona, they will give 20 elemental damage bonus to characters of their element. That 20% will work even in non-Hexerei teams, but if you are playing them in a Hexerei team, it's 40% to both their element and the element of the on-field character, which is insane. This is basically like the Hexerei scroll set, which was 40% when you triggered a reaction with a Natalan character. But this doesn't require reaction, it's basically guaranteed. You just need to make sure your team doesn't have too many elements going on. But similarly to characters like Shenhe, Shenyuin, Nicole is a character where your main focus is just getting as much attack as possible on her build, whilst also getting some energy recharge substats so you can use her burst. Is there any benefit to picking up crit stats? Not really. She doesn't really have much of her own personal damage. Even this extra damage here, the 300%, that uses Nicole's attack, but it will be using your on-field character's career and damage bonus. You basically just build her attack. And for ER, my recommendation from a lot of the teams I was testing would be 160% to 190% depending on your team. And because you get an extra 20 from the set bonus, you really don't need to be even getting an ER sans. Just pick up ER from the artifact pieces. And especially if you pulled her signature weapon, this just directly gives her energy on top of that. Speaking of weapons, as I showed before, with her signature, you can very comfortably hit the 4k attack requirement. And any Nicole energy requirement is not going to be hard. If you don't have a signature, there's many other good options, like Memory of Dust gives you a lot of attack. You should still be able to get close to that. Skyward Atlas is similar to Memory of Dust. Basically any weapon that gives attack. A strong budget option you could have expected will be TTDS, although the base attack on this weapon is a lot lower than the 5-star weapons. So yeah, you can see my attack tanked. I can get it higher with team attack buffs, but with a low base attack weapon like this, I'm not going to be hitting 4k attack. But that's not going to be a problem though, because you're making up for that by getting 48% extra attack on your character here. Just to show an example, let's say I'm using Skyward Atlas. My Klee has 2.164k attack. If I use Nicole's skill, it's 3.048 attack. Let me switch out to TTDS. I completely tank Nicole's own attack. But if I use her skill, switch to Klee, the overall attack is actually higher than Skyward Atlas. Now obviously that's basically it for the upsides, because TTDS does have quite a lot of downsides though. Number one, that extra attack buff is not team wide, so even if your on-field character's attack can be higher, your off-field character's attacks will suffer. Also, TTDS has a 20-second cooldown, and a lot of modern teams, most modern teams in fact, should rotate faster than this 20-second cooldown, which means you're probably not getting this every rotation. On top of that, the less attack you have on Nicole does mean her shield gets weaker. And lastly, as I mentioned before, Nicole is such a good battery, especially in content like Stygian or whenever you just have no energy in your team. You want to be able to switch to her to generate energy for your team. And using TTDS will make it so you don't want to switch to Nicole, so it could further weaken your overall team's output. But overall, I would still recommend it if you don't have one of the better options. Her signature is basically perfect. You're getting a ton of attack on her. You're getting extra damage bonus to the team, 26% to the on-fielder, and then you get 50% of that to your off-fielders, so 13%. And it batteries Nicole. It's a very good weapon. How good is Nicole's weapon? I did some quick calculations in a Klee team. It can be like 9% team damage buff, which is not bad. It's not amazing, but it's still a pretty good increase, and it can be worth it in maybe teams like this where have that many vertical investment options, and I actually get Nicole's weapon being a bigger upgrade than upgrading Klee's weapon, and it can be like that for quite a few teams. So getting into the teams, what have I been enjoying? What will work well with Nicole? First of all, she works great with any Anemo DPS, especially Anemo Hexerei DPSs like Venti, or Vodka, especially with the new character Prune, these teams are going to be best for your Animo Hexerei characters. On top of that, it's actually not just the Hexerei Animo characters, but I actually think she should be an upgrade for characters like Xiao or Wanderer as well, whether you're playing Farazan or Prune with them. Both of them appreciate Nicole's attack buffs, Nicole's shield. They also do appreciate that your Nicole Durin team probably has less animation time and less energy issues than an old Farina Shenyuan team. For Venti, I actually liked Prune over Farazan because Prune does give a decent amount of buffs similar to Farazan. Not quite as big, but she does buff the whole team. But what Prune does especially is she's very good at generating energy. Nicole's also basically best for any Hexerei team. So let's talk about the other Hexerei teams. Let's talk about Klee. And what I've learned is Nicole is very flexible with Klee, and she doesn't necessarily compete with Bennett or Durin. You can play her with Durin, or you can also play her replacing Durin. I'll be making a separate video for Klee specifically, but the general biz team I've found is this team. But also, if you want to play Nicole and Durin, I've found the old mono pyro teams to be very good, especially against the Stygian boss, which wants you to play pyro and animo teams. Also, as someone who's been playing a lot of mono on field for the past few patches, Nicole is a huge buff to these teams. I will make a separate video on this explaining all the different nuances. But you could play a full Hexerei team like this and on-field mono, and it's very powerful now. Or you could play Lali, or you could play Shilonen or Sucrose. Another cool synergy is burning teams. And Emily is similar to Durin, one of those newer sub DPSs which don't snapshot Bennett's buffs. So previously it was very hard to buff Emily in your Kinich team, which meant a lot of Kinich teams you weren't even playing Emily. But Nicole's buffs being team-wide, buffing both Emily and Durin and Kinich. On top of this artifact set, buffing both Pyro and Dendro. These are huge buffs to Emily. Previously with Kinich, you played either Bennett, who only buffs Kinich, and even his circle could be a big issue, or you were using Ian-san, who can give her scroll buff to the whole team, but it can be inconsistent, and her attack buff was still focused on Kinich, and her energy was a bit questionable. But now a double Pyro, double Dendro team that fully buffs the whole team. This honestly is a perfect example because it makes it so even though Kinich or Emily aren't even Hexerei DPSs, Nicole almost ends up to be the perfect buffer and sustain for them. There was a reason they showed off this exact team in the preview stream a few days ago. Klee's also not the only overload team you can play with Nicole. You can play non-Hexerei DPSs like Clorinde, which they also showed off this team in the preview stream. Now, Nicole's not going to be perfect for Clorinde because first of all, you have to wait 3 seconds for the extra 300 attack buff. But also, Clorinde especially was designed where she hits a cap with attack, and she doesn't scale that well with too much attack. But a team like this should still be around the mix of within Nicole's best teams. I don't necessarily think it's going to be superior to the old Mavuika Nalan team, but a team like this doesn't have a shield. Nicole does give a shield for Clorinde, so the quality of life is still very nice. I also want to talk about Navia Geo teams, because Nicole should be a big upgrade in Navia's traditional teams. If you look at a team like this, Mavuika was nice, Bennett was nice, Shilonen was nice. But once you swapped out Mavuika for Durin, well then Bennett wasn't buffing Durin anymore. And also, if Durin was the only Hexerei character, you weren't able to fully unlock his passives. That's why a lot of people, including myself, got higher DPS playing Albedo. But what Nicole does is she will activate your Durin's passives whilst being an upgrade to Bennett's sustain and attack buffs, and it means you can go back to Shilonen again. However, I will say this is coming right after a patch where the Lunar Crystallized teams just came out for Navia, and these should still be better because Linnea was specifically designed for these Lunar Crystallized teams, and it's going to be hard for the hypercarry teams to compete. But if you did want to play a Navia team focusing on Navia's damage, a team like this should be a great option. You can still play Albedo instead of Shilonen, but fortunately Albedo is like the only Hexerei character that doesn't scale off of attack, so his skill will not be getting the Nicole buff. So That's very unfortunate. I also think a character like Arlecchino would benefit a lot from Nicole. Even though the 3-second delay on the attack buff is going to be an issue, I don't know exactly what the optimal 4th character would be, but I imagine you definitely play Seat Lolly here as well for the melts. Another pyro character who really appreciates the shield would be Lyney, and Nicole being pyro helps Lyney a lot as well. I feel like if I play Lyney in this team, I would lean towards an overload team. Also, speaking of pyro characters who want a shield, there's Xiao and Wanderer. I do want to talk about Xiao especially though, because the cool thing about Nicole, because she gives a team-wide attack buff, I think that actually makes Xingqiu have a big advantage over Yelan. Let's say I've got some really bad attack, 1.3k. Boosting that up by 600 is a big deal. And honestly, at that point, I don't think Yelan's small damage bonus would necessarily be worth it. As for the 4th slot, you're going to want to finish off the Hexerei team. Whilst you can run Sucrose for more EM to Xiao, I think there's more appealing options. One appealing option would be Mona. You get Hydra Resonance, increasing Xiao's HP. And then Mona's buffs will buff the whole team. And last odd character I do think is interesting would be Ganyu. Now Ganyu's charge attacks are probably slow enough that, yeah, I got the full Nicole buff before even my 2nd charge attack went off. So whether you want to start off with Ganyu's burst or you want to do charge attack straight away, Ganyu's less punished than some other characters for that delay. Same thing with Lyney, I guess. Now I do want to talk about Mavuika, because this is a very good example of Nicole's balancing, where she is less effective with Mavuika. Not only do you have the 3-second delay on the 300 attack, but Mavuika, by design, wants you to stack a bunch of Natlan teammates with her in order to power each other's Night Soul bonuses. Whether you're playing Overload Mavuika or Melt Mavuika, you just don't have space for a character like Nicole. And Bennett's attack buff coming online straight away was huge for Mavuika's nuke. On top of that, all 3 of the Luna teams, or even if you're playing Colombina as a DPS, these teams have little use for a buffer like Nicole. And on top of that, Skirk teams can't even play a pyro character anyway with her elemental restrictions. This is all good balancing. It means the developers were able to design Nicole's power budget to boost several teams without being able to impact many of the strongest, newest teams. But even then, it allowed them to make a fairly wide niche for Nicole. But I should say, it's not just Nicole by herself who is buffing all these Hexerei teams. It's Nicole and it's her artifact set here. This is a huge bonus. In fact, in my calculations, the new set by itself is buffing your teams by 14%, 15, 16, 17%. And strictly damage-wise, Nicole herself can be less of an upgrade than that. But you can stack Nicole and the set, and then you're getting a big increase. Plus, on top of that, if you're playing a team with Prune, Prune can also be a buff to your teams. So it can be a combination of multiple elements, but I do think Nicole also giving you that quality of life makes her very powerful in a lot of teams. So which players should pull Nicole? Who should avoid Nicole? I would say 100% consider pulling if you've already invested into Hexerei teams. Varka, Venti, Klee, Mona. If you want to play any of those Monster characters, Nicole's a perfect addition. Also, please stay tuned for Lowen previews later on this patch, because he's also a Hexerei DPS who should synergize incredibly well with Nicole. The only Hexerei character who doesn't synergize amazingly with Nicole is Albedo, because he is obviously defense scaling with his skill. But Albedo does give EM buffs and a lot of damage bonus to your Hexerei team, so he can still have a lot of value as a support in these Hexerei teams. If you're planning to invest into Nicole, it's very nice that Nicole's and Durin's weapons will be on banner at the same time, and it's quite a good chance you're playing them both. So if you ever wanted to get both these weapons, then now is definitely the time. Also, make sure to do the cancel trick, which is if you want both of those weapons and you're pulling on the banner, you hit that 5-star and you get a standard weapon, you want to cancel that pity that you built. The reason why is you basically don't lose doing that. You put this weapon back on. The next 5-star you get is going to guaranteed be either Nicole or Durin's weapon. And then if you get Durin's weapon next, it means the next 5-star after that is guaranteed to be Nicole's. As long as you want both weapons. If you just want Nicole's weapon, then don't cancel. Just get it as your second 5-star. However, I do have to mention that pulling on the weapon banner may not be ideal because Prune is also on Nicole's banner. And Prune is a very powerful sub DPS and buffer, especially for Animo Hexerei teams. Give your Varka or Venti an attack buff. She'll give a damage buff to your whole team. She does pretty decent damage herself. She's even favored with the latest Stygian bosses. And if you get her constellations, her attack's going to be even higher. Her damage is going to be even higher. And her C6 will give an extra attack buff to your on-fielder. So you may want to consider that instead of going for the weapon first. As for my plans, me personally, I will be pulling for Nicole and her weapon definitely. I do play a lot of old characters like Klee, Mona, Venti. I play a lot of Clorinde, Navia, Raiden. There's so many characters who I play which could work very well with Nicole. And I also will try to go for Prune Constellations. But I have over 50k primos, so wish me luck. Hopefully it works out for me. Stay tuned for more early access Nicole videos. I hope you guys found this video helpful and have a good day. Thanks for watching.